to session 2.2 of the Carbon Pricing Conference, dedicated on how to decarbonize energy production and utilization. I am Isabelle Czerniowski-Loriol, the co-chair of the conference with Fabrice. I am a Research and Public Policy Chief Officer at BRGM, the French Geological Survey. The conference is broadcasted since BRGM offices in Paris. And I am very pleased to introduce the moderator of the session, who is BRGM Deputy Chief Executive Officer and Scientific Director, Christophe Poinceau. So I will now give the floor to him to moderate the session and introduce the panelists. Thank you, Christophe.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. So it's my pleasure to be with you today and to have the chance to share together and have discussions regarding what can be the technology which can help the world globally to mitigate the global climate change. And I suggest as an introduction to leave the floor to the different speakers to introduce themselves. So maybe we can start by Juho.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Juho Lipponen. I am coordinator of the Clean Energy Ministerial Carbon Capture Initiative, but I am in this panel representing the Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat, who were not able to join today. So very happy to give you this one. Thank you.
So Hamed?
My name is Ahmed Badr. I am the Director of Project Facilitation and Support Division in the International Renewable Energy Agency in Abu Dhabi.
Satish?
Good morning to all of you. This is Satish Gupta, having 30 years of experience in standardization in National Standard Body Bureau of Indian Standards. At the same time, I have been a member of FCC CDM accreditation team for competence verification of DOEs. I am a verifier for airport carbon accreditation, verifier for CORSIA, verifier for MRP regulations for GHG emissions from maritime. So it's a great opportunity. I would like to thank the representatives team to invite me for this session. Thank you very much.
And Sydney?
Thanks, Christophe, and a very good morning to all of you all. I did introduce myself the earlier session, so let me do it once again. I've been in the energy space for more than about 25 odd years, in the hydrocarbon as well as the energy space. Out of the corporate world in October last year, and now working with new development, new technologies, and trying to work with startups, who are really struggling to make a difference, but have the passion to do it. So it's good to be part of this conference, and we'll be more than happy to share my views. Thank you.
So thank you very much, dear speaker and panelists. It's my pleasure to be with you today, and I'm quite confident we will have the chance to share very interesting views. So maybe I'm going to give a few words, I would say, to set the scene before leaving the floor to you and to the discussions we will have together. So as all of you probably know, so we are in a situation where we have a very short time frame to react. I mean, to reduce very significantly the net carbon emissions in the atmosphere in order to mitigate global climate change in consistency with the Paris 2015 agreement. And in this context, so many countries, most of them basically, have taken nationally determined contributions, which are quite important and which are based on different technologies that need to be implemented in order to meet this commitment. And the aim for most of these countries is to reach a global carbon neutrality, which is a very important concept, which means that we have a strict balance between the anthropic emissions, which are more or less related to our activities, and net anthropic removals or sinks. And that's a concept which has only a sense at the global worldwide scale, but it has been derived, I would say, something equivalent for the different countries, for the different companies, but it has to be understood, first point, that it's really a very global concept, and we have to be careful when we derive a local contribution. In order to meet this commitment, we have several topics or several issues to address simultaneously. The first one is to decarbonate the energy production. That's probably the most discussed topic worldwide in many countries, in the public opinion and so on. It is based basically on very significant electrification of the energy, based on the low carbon power production, and the low carbon power production can be of different types. We have for sure the renewables, which are very well known, like windmill, geothermy, solar panel, and so on. But we have also the nuclear power, which is also part of the games. And we have a very significant difference between the two, which is the problem of the intermittency of the renewables, which is a very important topic that we have to address, because one of the key points, and that's the second message in this energy transition, is the fact that in fact, electricity has a very significant drawbacks, is that you need to balance very strictly from time to time the production and the consumption. So you have no easy and efficient way to really store the electricity, even if we are making very significant progress in the batteries. So we have a clear issues of smoothing, let's say, the production and the consumption based on smart grids, based also on energy storage, and also probably based on intermediate energy vectors such as green hydrogen. And for sure that will be one of the points of our discussion today, because it's a topic which is taking a rising interest worldwide. And I'm quite sure we will have the chance to discuss about that. So that's the first issue, which is decarbonation of energy production. But we have also to think about the decarbonation of usage, based for, as I mentioned, on the increased usage of electricity. And so it has to address the different use of the energy. So it means the transportation, which is a very significant contribution in many countries. We have also to address the problem of the agriculture, the residential and tertiary usage, and the manufacturing and industry. So the share of the different usage is depending from countries to countries. And but one point which is very important is the fact that amongst these different usage, we know already that we will have some residual emissions that we will probably never be able to cancel, and therefore we need also to think about sinks for carbon, and the carbon capture and storage or usage. So the well-known CCUS, and we have a specialist around the table today, will be something which is quite important in the global landscape, and that will have also to be developed. And so we'll have also the chance to discuss this topic. And so we see that, in fact, we have no one single magic solution in order to solve the problem of the energy. We have to combine everything together. There is no possibility to just cancelling one solution and so on. So it's really a global thinking that we need to develop in order to develop a sustainable low-carbon energy mix. And I guess that will be one of the key topics of our discussion, to see how we can promote this development. Before leaving the floor to the panelists, maybe two final comments from my side and from my own expertise and experience in this field. First one is the fact that the time frame of energy is a very long time frame. I mean, the time you need to build a plant and the time you will be able to operate the plant is several decades, and it can be longer than 50 years. So it means that we have a very significant inertia in the system of energy production and consumption. And the decisions which are taken right now may have effect in several years or even decades, and at the same time it means that the situations that will be available in some decades from now has to be decided right now. So it's something which is very difficult to handle in terms of policy, in terms of political decisions, because it's a time frame which is quite different from the political one. And the second comment I would like to mention is the fact that I already mentioned that point, but I think we have no single solution. I mean, we have really to take into account the particularity of each country in terms of geography, in terms of weather, in terms of technology, in terms of industry, and so on. And therefore, it's not a right option for me just to say, let's copy and paste what is occurring on this country or this other country. So we should avoid extrapolating a single solution, but try to develop very specific and adapted ones. So that was two comments I wanted to put on the floor to open the discussions. And as an second introduction, I would say, I leave the floor to Juho, who is going to give us to share his experience regarding these important topics, and in particular the CCUS. So Juho, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Christoph. And so I will talk to you a bit more broadly, also around the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is a particular government-led process to accelerate clean energy. And it's not the only one. I mean, we have Ahmed in the panel today. Irina is doing fantastic work in renewable energy sphere, and the Clean Energy Ministerial collaborates with Irina and others too. But if I may, just a few words on this particular forum, because it may serve as an interesting sort of background. Energy Agency, we will all have seen these wedge diagrams coming from them, and which show how we need to reduce CO2 emissions from energy. Often you see these wedges by technology. There's renewables and energy efficiency that occupy a lion's share in this, but then you have some others like nuclear and carbon capture that also have their role to play. But in a way, reflecting the point that our chairman was making on the timing. If you look at this chart, I think what is interesting here is really the fact that up until 2030, we have lots of mature technologies and those who are in early adoption that can do a lion's share of the job. But that's just the next 10 years, and less than that even. After that, we're going to have to really significantly ramp up technologies that are only in demo or even some prototype phase today. And so the timing is really critical to make progress on both sides. And hence also the interest of this conference and discussion. Won't dwell on this much, but again, the International Energy Agency tracks how different clean energy technologies are progressing with a simple traffic light system. Green is progressing according to plan, yellow when there's progress but not enough, and red when you're pretty far off the mark. And you can see that red is still a bit too dominant color in this chart of a lot of technologies. Some are moving to amber, but only too few of them are in green. And I think that also goes to show how important it is to continue to collaborate in driving these technologies forward. And that's where, and obviously we want to make them all green as soon as we possibly can. Now, back to the Clean Energy Ministerial, which then is one vehicle of trying to achieve that. This is 27 member countries plus 2 new countries joining this year across the world, and also North and South. This is not only the industrialized countries. There's also emerging economies who are part of the Clean Energy Ministerial. So that's the green countries you see on the map, and then a number of them are blue. They are not yet full members, but they are participating in Clean Energy Ministerial work in some particular way. And so this is a very relevant coalition of
country actors who work together on a voluntary basis to drive clean energy deployment. Voluntary is an important word because there's no targets or formal targets associated to clean energy ministerial work. Countries take their formal targets from UNFCCC and other mechanisms where they've committed to it. And this is a tool to try to make clean energy deployment happen. And on the right-hand side, you see the different other organizations that collaborate very closely with this system. IRENA was mentioned, but equally the International Energy Agency and World Energy Council, various finance institutions, research institutions, and which is not shown on this slide, also industry. So all of the work that the Clean Energy Ministerial does is basically open to industrial companies that are interested in collaborating with governments and other organizations. So it really is a very powerful coalition of influential actors. And there's been 11 Clean Energy Ministerial meetings up until now, and actually the 12th is underway as we speak, hosted by the government of Chile. And it is possible still to also follow those discussions from their website. So these are the ministerial meetings that happen once per year. But then, and this is not to be read in any kind of detail, but it kind of shows the multitude of different work streams that happen under this clean energy ministerial process on a voluntary basis. So countries choose to take part in some of them and choose not to take part in some of them. And they are really across the board, from various aspects of clean power to electric vehicles to hydrogen, bioenergy, biofuture, also carbon capture and storage, as was mentioned, and so forth. And countries join when they feel that this is an important area for them, and when they have a strategic interest in driving a certain technology into the market. So that's to show that the ministers meet once a year, but it's not just the ministers who meet. There's a lot of work going on between the meetings. And if anyone in the audience is interested in this, please get in touch through the organizers, and we can link you with the appropriate groups for your interest. And this was the last slide I wanted to show, just to highlight that the 12th Clean Energy Ministerial meeting is going on at the moment. So after today's session at this conference and tomorrow, if you have a moment, log on to sem12mi6chile.com and register, and you can still also catch some of these discussions in this forum. So I will stop the screen share here and simply say that everybody's needed in this game. Industry, finance sector, the Clean Energy Ministerial is but one possible platform for collaboration, and many others are needed as well. But perhaps this provides some kind of background and interest for the rest of the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Juho, for this very interesting and introduction. And it's nice to see that there is so many commitments coming from all around the world to move forward in this direction. So thank you very much for your experience. So I propose that, so you mentioned in your slide and on your figures that we need to accelerate the pace of development of this low carbon technology. So I would like to ask Sydney, because he has been long involved in the technology development as a technology advisor. What does he think about the low carbon technologies that can be deployed quickly in order to move forward low carbon technology and carbon neutrality, and maybe what are the levers that can make this feasible? How to reduce the time to market, if I can use this word.
Thanks, Christoph. And I agree with Juho that we are running out of time. If you look at the recent report, I think just about 6 days ago, the WMO released a report that there is a 40% chance that the average global temperatures will hit 1.5 degrees within the next 5 years.
Now, if that happens, then it can be a point of no return, because the climate is not like a car which it will go and then stop and it can come in the reverse. If it already crosses 1.5, then the impacts could be quite challenging. So time is of the essence. Now, to look at decarbonization, there are a number of technologies available. You require finance as well. At the end of the day, what is it? What is important? Is the return on investment so important, or is your long lasting sustainability important? For example, now the world is talking about hydrogen. Hydrogen is supposed to be the next generation fuel because it does not have any emissions. But yes, the costs are high. Globally, number of them are working on it. There is an opportunity to make it economical. Carbon capture and utilization. Okay, I'm not saying the word sequestration. I'm calling it utilization, because there are technologies available in which CO2 blended with hydrogen can be made into a synthetic fuel. So it addresses certain aspects. And as Christoph, you mentioned earlier, it's not one solution fits all the issues. So we will have to take different solutions. And once some solution may be very expensive in a certain geography, so it could have the least amount of influence. Whereas in another geography, depending upon the market economics, it can play a different role. So one has to look at which solution plays the biggest role and addresses the aspect of carbon mitigation. Keeping in mind also sinks, as you mentioned about sinks. When we are talking about, let's say, developing an organic sink or developing a green sink, one has to realize that it will only act as a sink after a few years, because a plant just doesn't grow in one day and start sequestering tons of carbon dioxide. So even if we start the sink today, it may take about 5 to 10 years, depending upon the species that we are talking about, to actually sequester a certain amount of carbon. You mentioned about the energy sector or the utility sector. There is enough amount of renewable in terms of, and this is a known technology in terms of wind and solar, in different parts of the world. Even in the last year, there were so many statements that Germany was operating only on renewable power. But now if you want to make this infirm power into firm power, then storage will play a very important role. And what's the kind of storage that we are talking about? Today, yes, globally, everybody is pushing on lithium ion. But if you talk about lithium ion, your mining is going to increase like crazy. So again, storage has to be looked at, which storage fits for what solution. If you're talking about energy arbitrage, we just require maybe gravity storage or compressed air storage. It's okay. Efficiencies may be a little low as compared to lithium ion, but these are long running and long storage system. So as you pointed out, different solutions, different packages based on different geographies and the economics as well. And of course, the biggest one to make all this happen in quicker time is the finance. So, if someone sits and just looks at the return on investment and IRR today, it will not make sense. But then that plunge has to be taken, because it's an issue which is global. It's not just a so-called very local issue.
So thank you very much. In fact, I fully agree with what you said regarding the sustainability. I think it's the real criteria that we should all have in front of our analysis. I mean, we have to think globally, we have to think long term, and single solution taken alone can't be a right solution. So you're fully right. It could be quite interesting to have the viewpoint of Hamed, who is working at IRENA regarding the development of renewables. So as you mentioned, it's not part of the game, and I would like to ask him how he sees the development of these technologies worldwide, what role they can play in order to reduce the carbon emissions and the journey towards carbon neutrality, and what is his vision regarding the next equilibrium energy mix.
Thank you very much for offering me this relevant question. Actually, I fully agree with what mentioned by Joe and by my colleague in Sydney, but Actually, in order to integrate the views specifically with Joho and the clean ministerial initiatives that's coming from this unique structure, we have also to work with the developing economies. And I remember Joho very well, and you also started by talking about the importance of supporting developing economies in order to change their energy mix, in order to change the carbon structure or the hydrocarbon industry in their countries. And in that sense, we had to join with as IRENA, with the United Nations Development Program in order to launch a very important program together with Sustainable Energy for All and in coordination with Green Climate Fund, a platform that basically aiming to enhance and accelerate the climate investment globally, or climate investment or carbon neutrality related investment globally. And actually it works well. So if Fabrice could basically give me the control in order to present few slides, about 5 slides, about what's climate investment platform and how does it work, I would really appreciate. So the climate investment platform is basically a platform that works now and deliver results. And it's basically in order to, it was meant to develop and to make a tripartite partnership between banks and countries and investors, and to end up with putting solution on project-based transactional solutions for projects in developing economies mainly, but also if any developed economy wanted to do that, we are ready to support. And you will see the results in my next few slides. So next slide actually is to give you what is the platform or the sorry for that. So the climate investment platform, again, it was established during the UN Secretary General conference that was basically launched in September 2019, and it works among those 4 institutions I mentioned earlier. And actually it works on practical terms on 4 tracks. First track, to help countries to develop their climate targets as per Paris Accord in 2015. Second is to help those countries based on these targets to develop and enforce relevant policies and regulation, and to create a marketplace in which those projects will come based on these targets and reformed policies to come into an action and to be developed and matched with available financing opportunity, mainly from private sector, and secondly from development banks, including local banks, in order to make sure that we are crowding in local economies, and finally working on de-risking these projects in partnership with banks. To date, basically, we can see that the most attractive region that requesting the support of the CIP and benefited of this is West Africa region. Among other 14 divisional region we have developed. In Africa only we have 5 divisions between North, South, East, and Western Central Africa, to be followed by 2 regions in Central America and Latin America, 1 region in Central America, and then 2 regions in Asia, 1 region in Southeast Europe, another 2 regions in small island developing states. To date, we have received more than 200 projects, specifically 218, and applying basically, and also we have 57 partners, financial partners, starting with World Bank and most of regional development banks like Inter-American Development Bank, African Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Sorry, if you go for next slide and to look how are these 218 projects, as I just mentioned earlier, is that about 50% of the projects are basically are requesting financing, to be followed by projects that need pre-feasibility or in a very early stage, and we are supporting too. And we are talking here about investment with more than $2 trillion. And if you look for the measure of the project, that we can see that clearly that most of the projects coming from private sector, which is very good phenomena, because actually a lot of financial partners coming as asset management funds like BlackRock and Blackstone. And finally, we are talking here about the major requested funding for projects in Africa, and most of the countries globally is coming for small scale projects. This calls for an importance to crowd in and call local banks in order to involve and to work on supporting small scale projects. I have to say here that the COVID-19 as one of the challenges that we met and at working now, transforming it into opportunity, is that small-scale projects will help a lot in affording more public health services that will directly impact in positive combating all pandemic diseases starting with COVID-19. I think it's very relevant and important to mention that here. If you go for the next slide, we can see clearly that out of these 218 projects we had to work over the past year during the COVID-19 in order to sorting out this project, and we basically applying our quality at entry projects, because actually our banking team that we developed, or we found that there are 50 projects that is in need for project for technical assistance to develop them into bankability level in order for financiers to come and to support. And again, let's not forget that this is to answer the main question by our moderator and by Drew, that we are working on scaling up and accelerating carbon-friendly investment, mainly renewable energy. And this is more action in the ground by facilitating more investment. And you will see now that out of these 50 projects, we defined 32 projects already supported by IRENA. And actually, out of these 32, there are already 15 projects have already accepted by international financial institution to provide funding. Last of which a project last week, it was accepted to be funded by World Bank and Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and it was 100 megawatt in Sudan. To give you some important numbers here, for these 32 projects, we are looking for an overall investment exceeding $1 billion, or exactly $1.1 billion. And we are aiming to 464 megawatt to be installed. And in terms of carbon friendly and saving GHG emission, we're talking about more than 5 million ton of CO2 equivalent to be saved. I have to tell you also finally that if you look for the some example, if you're looking for West Africa, we find that West Africa, because of we have very active ministerial council related to energy, which is in ECOWAS, that these countries is very active and has attracted most of the international financial institution, investment bankers, banking institution, and bankers and private sector to come and invest, to be followed by East Africa, which basically COP26 will provide more support to East African countries, among other small island developing states and Southeast Asia and Central Asia as well. Finally, I just would like to highlight this very important slide, and which will be my last slide. And this is actually related to what are the partners with us in the CIP. You can see that we have more than 50 financing partners, including development banks and international financing institution. But the major investment needed is basically between two things: debt, which is normal, including de-risking debt, but more importantly, actually is the equity, because the high rise, or basically the increase of the profitability or return on investment on renewable energy. I can tell you that clearly the percent of this 27% of equity, it will go further to be more exceeding in the years to come, as per our World Energy Transition Report and our costing report, to be exceeding the debt percentage. Because simply investors are looking for this, especially if we are looking at how can we de-risk this investment. Last example before handing over to my respected colleague, the moderator, is the fact that if you look for some big investor equity investment company like Climate Invest, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, who are putting $50 billion from Denmark pension funds to invest in renewable energy, it's quite clear that the more we work on de-risking investment in renewable energy in developing economies, the more we spread on reaching carbon neutrality and Paris Agreement targets. I stop here. I'm sorry that most of my intervention on banking and examples, but this is basically because I'm a banker by background, and my division working mainly on putting more results, factual results, and evidence-based support in the ground. And thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Moderator.
This presentation and for all what is done by IRENA to develop the low carbon technologies. I would like to leave the floor to Satish. He has a long experience as a climate expert, being involved in UFCC, and I would like to ask him what could be the role of the carbon pricing and the carbon market, and how we can have an international carbon exchange and how it can support development of the regional policy. And as you mentioned, there is a very important driver to promote, which is a financial one. So Satish, the floor is yours.
Thank you, the chairman of this panel. Actually, I'm delighted that already the three speakers have already, spoken about Mr. Joho, Sydney, and Irena. They have already covered many points which I wanted to say. But at the same time, I would like to say that initially you mentioned about that not a single technology would work for all the countries altogether. Because geographically, if we see all countries, they have a different kind of, social aspects. They have a different kind of geographical aspects. So the single technology which we want to propose would not work for all the countries together. At the same time, as rightly mentioned, is that while we go for carbon pricing, it may not be should not be a long-term pricing policy, because if it is a short-term kind of action plan, likewise in CDM, we were having the maximum number of CDM projects in India, where we could see that baseline methodology and all kind of projects they had given at that time, they were online. So the countries which were not able to afford the carbon emission reductions, they could be getting a lot of benefit out of the technology available to them to the developed countries. So it will be a nice idea. You mentioned about the low carbon technology aspects. The low carbon technology aspects, I would say that in India, most of the countries here in Asia, they are going for low carbon road transport. For example, there is a e-vehicle movement which is going on in a big place. Again, there would be a big problem about the availability of the lithium-ion batteries. So lithium-ion is again a concern already. Mr. Sydney has already covered that point. That whenever we go for any kind of technology, we should see the pros and cons and then benefits occurring out of it. At the same time, the availability of the resources to complete that kind of thing. We are also delighted to see that there is a carbon pricing leadership coalition by World Bank. That coalition is giving us the carbon pricing leadership report is already available. That report is for the latest year, and in that, if we see that report in detail, many of the companies which are available here in India and all Asia Pacific, they have already committed to their they have already pledged how much which technology they will use, and then how much they are going to reduce. So depending on the requirement of a country, it is specific to the country to country. So in India also, we would like to say that let it be the responsibility of the specific country to use a particular technology. If suits to them, they can always use it, and if doesn't suit to them, they can always find out some other alternatives. That is my submission, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We emphasized several times in this discussion today that there is no single solution to apply it everywhere. It's rather a national solution to develop country by country. And at the same time, and many of you are involved in multilateral initiatives, but at the same time we need to collaborate, because we will either win together or lose together the global mitigation, the global climate competition, I would say. So I'm going to leave the floor to all of you, but how do you think we can reconcile this national policy, which depends on the national characteristic, and at the same time the need for promoting a strong international cooperation, in particular between the more mature and developed countries and the less developed countries? I don't know who wants to take the floor to give some insight.
I'll take a start. I'll take a start on that. So, when we're talking about a collaborative approach, now, I mean, we still will have to accept the fact that we will still need liquid fuels to a certain extent. Okay, now that's a given. It will have to be accepted. But can we look at making synthetic fuels? Now, synthetic fuels can very well address the aviation sector. They can address the large transportation sector. Collaborations could be worked out with, say, the financial institutions, with the country which does have, say, carbon capture at the lowest cost of carbon capture, in terms of dollar per ton of carbon dioxide. Look at hydrogen generation, combine the two, and make synthetic fuel. Now, this is something which can be done, in terms of technological collaborations, interest of the countries in order, because some of the countries, as I think even Juho or my colleague from IRENA mentioned, that those countries who are still dependent upon fossil fuel, or their economies are dependent upon fossil fuel, it may not be right to ask them to just kind of switch over. So in that space, synthetic fuel can be replaced by fossil fuel, which talks about a circularity taking into account the carbon dioxide which is emitted from some other industry. So that's the kind of collaboration that one could look at and then put it on the ground, so that the developing economy does have the hydrocarbon fuel which they require to build up their economy, but it's coming from sequestered carbon dioxide, and the CO2 becomes, it's in a circular motion. You are not digging it out of the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
If I come here
for sure.
to integrate with my colleague, I fully agree with what he said, number one. Number two, actually, there is, because we are working with government, actually, I can tell you that there is institutional complexity to change all these kind of regulation. And this is the most challenging part. And in order to do that, absolutely, this is right, but you need a lot of investment. Just to give you some important numbers from our World Energy Transition Report and also our costing report in IRENA here, that 2/3 of the needed investment to reach Paris Agreement targets has to come from private sector. All development banks globally, including World Bank Group institutions, cannot do all needed cost for these investments that we are talking about. Private sector has to come in. And to do that, you cannot also do that without including in this 2/3 of, we're talking here about trillions, we're talking at least about more than $15 trillion has to happen in less than a decade, specifically in 9 years, assuming now that we started the second half of 2021. That you have to include local economies, not only to have to because of the cost, but to have also, as we say in the banking language, to have a skin in the game. Otherwise, how do you secure this investment? So in reality, to do that, you have to crowd in these economies. Without it, it won't work. We're talking about plans over plans. But to do that in reality, you have to work in two things: dissolve or de-risk these institutional or reform these institutional structures in these economies. And second, to put pilot real examples to follow. And by that, you will help, including, by the way, introducing the hydrogen. Just to let you know that we are working now in a hydrogen project in Chile, since Joe is talking about that the clean said, but there is also some important introductory projects for hydrogen and for other business technologies to come in terms of clean energy. But you need to have it one by one. For sure, you need to scale up and to accelerate, which we do. But you need to keep in mind also that each of these countries have their own challenges. And without de-risking these problems, then you will lose 2/3 of the needed investment, as per our cost calculation here in IRENA in the report I mentioned earlier. Thank you very much.
If I may come in on this one as well, agree with what the previous speakers were saying, and particularly what Ahmed was saying about the need that this is not only coming from public purse. At the end of the day, citizens of the world will have to foot the bill of our cleaner technology, and but there's different ways to drive different parts of it. I think the mature technologies that we today have, the business case in many of them is starting to be there, and they just have to be brought to the market, and they are being brought to the market, which is great. But then where we need closer coalitions with governments and industry and finance is really also those new technologies that are not yet really there, that are in demo phase or prototype phase. You could talk about green hydrogen. We know how it can be made, but yet it's too expensive today, but it can be way less expensive tomorrow. Direct air capture, which may be well also for Sydney's point to create synthetic fuels. They can also be created out of the air if you have clean hydrogen available. So these types of technologies then will require coalitions between governments, industry, and finance to really drive them into the market through R&D and innovation inputs. So, but I think the signs are good. We have net zero targets from many parts of the world, many countries. COP26 coming up. We have a lot of, I think, positive movement around the real energy transition and transformation, and that is really, really great.
Thank you very much for the three of you. It was very interesting, and in fact, one of the movement which is rising right now is a significant interest on hydrogen, green hydrogen, I mean, which is not the real already existing. And so I would like to ask you also, what do you think about the impetus on the hydrogen economy? Do you think it could be a game changer? And what are the steps that will be needed for you in order to be able to have this technology mature early enough to be able to tackle the objectives of net zero in time?
Maybe I could start this important and very smart question. Actually, I have to thank you for this smart question. It is always a challenge, and I congratulate you for this question. I'm sorry to repeat that. Well, there are several drivers, but if you look at the past and to see similar examples, look at 10 years back, how does solar PV and CSP was working. At that time, 10 years ago, CSP was really the technology that we are looking at because it materializes the energy storage, so you can have 24/7 clean power supply. But then the Chinese specifically and Indians came with this battery storage and lithium-based storage, and then it moved up in Europe. France, Germany, and UK took the lead, and now it works. So I can tell you that in our estimation from the World Energy Transition Outlook report and again costing report, we can see this will happen in terms of timing within the decade time. So it will catch the time before Paris Agreement targets will come into the deadline. But to reach that, there are several parallel actions has to take place. Number one is that developed economies, and this action already done, they already set targets for net zero by 2050. Most of the countries have done so. And European Commission and one of the major financial drivers globally through EIB and EBRD and European EDFIs basically doing that. In parallel, also, there is a global voice coming from international institutions, IRENA and IEA and others, has to put that. And the most challenging part is actually coming on the developing economies. But actually, this will happen for several reasons. Number one, if you look at the dramatic change now for IOCs, in order to put 20% of their global investment, all IOCs globally, in clean energy, this means they are coming into this, starting with hydrogen. That's really the case. So if you put some kind of adjusted extrapolation on how this curve will go up and to put some kind of projection with the solar PV and CSP in the past, including basically onshore wind and then offshore wind, you can see this will happen. Finally, I have to say that without crowding in local economies and working more on the risking more investment at normal renewable energy, that will help, because if you look at the overall global dimension of the countries, you can find that more than 80% of the countries globally doesn't have oil resources. Regardless that OPEC or OPEC Plus is working on putting the price, it goes up and down. But the more political comfort and ease and political ease for the countries who are non-oil source countries will look on and rely on clean energy, starting or including hydrogen, the better to advance this curve. So there are several parallel actions. Last of which I will conclude by this. If you look at Germany specifically, when they started their technology for boosting renewable energy, they have put more than 82 actions in parallel, more than 20 years, to start working on renewable energy and to foster it in their clean energy, in their energy mix. And this is taking shape now for other countries in Europe or developed economies to be followed by developing economies. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other insight around the table regarding the hydrogen economy?
So I think hydrogen is going to play a very key role. And it can play a key role because one of the best things is that the end of combustion is only water. You know, when it's burnt, it only gives out water as the end produce of combustion. However, the challenge is in making it economical. Today, yes, steam reformation or steam method reformation is the cheapest form of hydrogen available. And technology needs to be built in order to look at how we could maybe utilize existing carbon sources, for example, coal. You know, instead of directly burning coal, if we could look at gasifying the coal and then extracting hydrogen out of it and see how that would fit into the entire carbon balance of that technology. You know, if you are reducing the amount of CO2 emitted by that much quantity of coal being burnt and converting it into hydrogen, then it makes sense, you know, irrespective, you know, globally, we've given different color to hydrogen as, you know, green, blue, brown, etc. But it's not that the hydrogen is colored, it's just the methodology in which it is extracted. But in the long run, hydrogen surely can play a big role in the entire change of the energy mix on the carbon platform. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are slightly moving towards the end of this panel. I suggest, if you agree, that each of you, if you have a key message you would like to give to the audience. So I leave you the floor for one key message, one sentence, 1 minute.
A long sentence if it fills the whole minute, but I will try. Yeah, no, coming from where I come from, i.e. working with a government-led coalition of the willing, I think my key message is that, you know, we have lots of organizations, governments, industry, finance sector who actually want to make a difference, and now it's matter of doing it and keeping these actors together in Clean Energy Ministerial or IRENA or IEA or wherever they come together, like keeping them together and allowing them to drive forward. It's about doing it. We don't need to wonder about this transition anymore. That's my key message.
Thank you, Chuo. Yes?
Yeah, if you allow me, my key message was, let's continue pushing more on accelerating clean energy investment and helping developing economies on de-risking projects, including the introduction of new technologies, starting with hydrogen. Thank you.
Satish?
I'd just like to say that, you know, that a lot of things have been happening over here. And then we should see the economical aspects also, whether the technology which we are going to use, is it fair, and then it can be used by those countries which can afford it, and then it's a right kind of thing to think about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sydney?
Yeah, I think globally, we've all gone through this pandemic of COVID, right? And but for COVID, there is a vaccine available, irrespective of who has made it, but there is a vaccine available. But for climate change and for climate abatement, the only vaccine is seriously reduce your emissions. That's my final word. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank very much the four of you, very distinguished panelists. I guess we had a very interesting time, and I hope the audience will have appreciated this discussion. As a final message, I would like to say that our discussion clearly shows that first, we are all on the same boat. We are all in the same race in order to try to succeed to reduce our carbon emissions and reach the net zero carbon neutrality. And so it means that we need all the expertise around the table, and we need all the low carbon technologies. There is no single solution. Each country has to define its most relevant and most reachable solution in a time which is very short. And we have a very significant difficulty to overcome, which is a different of time frame between the time we have to take actions to mitigate the global climate change and the characteristic times of the energy system, which is quite long. And we all see that we need to reconcile these two issues, which is not so obvious. And so for sure we need, in order to promote this very significant movement, to implement key financial tools and financial rules, and carbon pricing technology is one of them. And so I guess we are on the real direction, moving forward all together in order to develop these low carbon future technologies. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank the audience, and I leave the floor to the organizer.